Behind the unassuming walls of Heartland House, Anthony John Hardy hid a darkness that would shake London to its core. From a brilliant university graduate to a man driven by twisted urges, Hardy lured his victims, leaving behind gruesome trails and shattered lives. What turned this seemingly ordinary man into the infamous Camden Ripper? Stay tuned as we unravel a chilling tale of mental illness, depravity, and the fragile line between brilliance and horror. Anthony John Hardy was born to Cyril Hardy on 31st of May, 1951 in Staffordshire County of England, United Kingdom. Cyril was a colliery welder, a coal miner. The 1950s was the decade politically dominated by the Conservative Party. It's still the early years post-Second World War. There was still rationing and food shortages. However, the economy was seeing a comeback with brighter years ahead. It's the decade of civil rights activism, social reform, and policy. Anthony's life was somewhat uneventful. Unlike most serial killers, his childhood was seemingly normal. He went to school and excelled academically, furthering his education in one of Britain's top universities. He graduated with honors and became an engineer. While at university, he met Judith Dwight, whom he married in 1972, and they had 4 children. In the beginning, they seemed okay, until one day Anthony tried to kill Judith by hitting her over the head first before trying to drown her in their bathtub while in their Tasmanian home. They were later divorced in 1986. After this episode, Anthony is diagnosed as having a mental condition and undergoes treatment at psychiatric hospital. He is diagnosed with depression, bipolar disorder. During this period, he stalks his former wife, who files a restraining order against him. He returns to Britain, where he begins to abuse drugs and alcohol. He becomes homeless, and his life spirals downward into depravity as he becomes an unemployed resident of hostels in the London area. He built up a rap sheet for drunken disorderliness, petty theft, and soliciting prostitutes. In 1998, he is accused by a prostitute of rape. However, the police let him go due to insufficient evidence. Anthony moved into his 1-bedroom council flat, Heartland House, in 2000. By this time, Anthony was described by some as a strange man who kept to himself. In December 2000, a torso belonging to that of a woman was found floating in the River Thames. A pedestrian had spotted the torso and called the police. The torso was drawn from the water, and the medical examiner confirmed she had been butchered with a sharp object, and that she'd been in the water for a few weeks. This woman was later identified as Zoe Parker. She was identified by her relatives by the presence of a rose tattoo on the remains. Zoe was a prostitute who worked in the Feltham and Hounslow area of North London. She had learning difficulties. The following year, in February, human remains belonging to 31-year-old mother of 2 Paula Fields was found in the Camden Canal. She worked as a prostitute, and she was addicted to crack. In January 2002, one of Anthony's neighbors had called the police. Upon arriving at his scene, they break into his apartment and find the naked corpse of 38-year-old Sally White. She had beaten over the head. She was covered in cuts and bruises. Sally was a sex worker who carried out her work in the King's Cross area of London. However, some sources would say they were flatmates. The examiner concluded she had died of a heart attack, resulting from spinal cord injury she sustained at birth and her drug-addicted lifestyle. However, this was re-examined much later, and her death was linked to Anthony after other bodies were found at his apartment. Anthony was arrested for pouring acid into a neighbor's letterbox. He was incarcerated at the St. Luke's Hospital, where he underwent psychiatric evaluation. Following diagnosis, he was seen as a risk to women. However, after many months, in November of that year, he was deemed of low risk and released from the hospital, only for him to claim the lives of his next 2 victims. It was a chilly winter Monday morning in December 2002. A homeless man went on his early morning forage for food in the bins behind shops on Royal College Street. in the hope he could find some food discarded by the restaurants to eat. He saw some black bags and opened them to find a shocking sight. Upon opening the bags, he found containing human remains. The victims' bodies were dismembered. It was later found they belonged to that of 34-year-old Bridget and 29-year-old Elizabeth. However, her heads and hands were never found, so it was hard to identify them. Bridget, in the end, was identified by her breast implants. The pathologist was able to confirm the bodies were female murdered only in the last few days. It's reported there was a blood trail which led to Heartland House, which was only a short walk from where the bodies were found. The police searched Hardy's house and found incriminating evidence, including a hacksaw with flesh still on it, an electric saw, body parts wrapped in film. The investigation into these cases delves deeper beneath the surface of his world, revealing Anthony was a devil worshiper who idolized Jack the Ripper. He lured prostitutes to his Camden flat. After rough sex, he strangled them. He would pose their nude bodies and photograph them. Occasionally, he shared the pictures with his friends. One of the pictures showed his victim in a devil mask and a baseball hat. Once he'd finished gratifying himself, he sawed their corpses in his bathtub with a hacksaw to make it easier to dispose them. Inside his Harlan House bedroom, they see the bed covered by a quilt, Anthony salvaged from a dustbin, disposed of by a neighbor. This was the dismembering room. It's early 2003. At this time, the semblance is unavoidable. It's hard not to pin the earlier murders of Zoe and Paula on Anthony, but he wasn't charged with them because there wasn't enough evidence to link him in their deaths. There were only two known survivors of the deadly Camden Ripper, namely Kelly Nickel and 25-year-old Francis Mayhew. It was found Anthony had tried to lure them to his flat, but they refused to go because they were uncomfortable going to the apartment of a man they didn't really know. Following a court hearing, Anthony was remanded into custody. In November 2003, Anthony was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Anthony died in November 2020 from COVID.